Hello and welcome to the Raptors Weekly Podcast. You're joining us shortly, mediumly after the Raptors lost to the Brooklyn Nets. Joining me, a dear friend of mine, one of the better ones that I've ever made, a man who I appreciate, a man who I revere in some respects, and just tolerate in others, I suppose. Louis Zatzman, I think we were going to say that you were going to do part of your introduction today. So what do you have for us? What are your priors?
My priors, you can find my work at 538, other places. These days, just keeping Raptors Republic, just shining the incredible work that other people are putting out. It's been great. I mean, you and your podcasts are obviously among the best in the entire industry, but ours has been so good, so much writing, video. It's been really cool to be a part of.
Popping off, you at the helm, leading the charge. At least that's what you said to me. Off the live, you were saying, wow, this place under my direction it's really starting to reach heights I never thought, and certainly heights that Blake couldn't take it to. If I'm
certainly, yeah. If you'd caught me, if the hot mic had been recording, I would have said some egregious things, but fortunately not.
Well, egregious to the people who aren't in the know. Of course, you're absolutely correct. Okay, first thing I want to talk about. We just came off a game where the Raptors lost to the Brooklyn Nets. And this is like a bit, captured in the moment, of course, but this podcast comes out tomorrow and people will probably still be talking about it. Helping off the corner. The Raptors, a team that I think are third in opponent turnover percentage. They are first in transition frequency. And they also probably pay less attention to the center position than most teams, the NBA over. And the center position, obviously, is synonymous with rim contests and altering shots at the bucket. That it doesn't always have to be, but that's kind of the idea. And so we have a team that helps off the corner and gives up corner threes. This has been their modus operandi. Am I using that correctly? That's what they've wanted to do. That's their defensive ethos for quite some time. But people are hand-wringing about it. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the helping off the corner.
So I understand the pros and the cons, and I think it speaks to a really interesting philosophy in that, well, first I'll start about the pros and cons, then we'll get to the philosophy. But the idea is that at its best, you can contest those threes. You can leave them open and get there because you have Pascal Siakam, Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby. I mean, Siakam and Anunoby both block jumpers from along the baseline in this game. And so even when they leave something open, if they're at their best, doesn't have to be open. But as so often happens, they are not always at their best. Nobody is always at their best. Toronto allowed a huge number of corner threes. 16% of Brooklyn's field goal attempts were corner threes. That's like an outrageous number of attempts. And they shot really well in them, almost 50%. Like that is almost the game in a nutshell right there. If you allow so many corner threes, you allow someone to shoot well, that's game. A lot of that was the first rotation was good, but you didn't have the second half of the X out, or guys were just way too focused on tagging the roller, which we covered in Minute Basketball quite recently. And so, at your best, you can take everything away. At your worst, you give up easy points. And then the philosophy is, how often can you be at your best? I find it interesting because if Toronto is going to the playoffs, I mean, they're not a team that's going to win unless they're at their best anyway. So why not make your best this world-altering defense? And if you don't reach it, you don't reach it because you're not going to win regardless. I think it's a really interesting theory. Not successful against Brooklyn. How do you feel about that?
Oh, that's wonderful. Especially since you had the stats to back it up. Like, do you think I had 16% of their shots in my bag? Because I absolutely did not. I didn't scurry off to cleaning the glass post game or anything like that. So I love that you bring that anecdote. Also, Pascal Siakam's blocked 3-pointer came after they sniffed out a Spain pick and roll, blew it up, and the ball, I guess what would the term be, funneled to the corner, and he blocked. I think it was Blake Griffin. Just a cool, fun little thing, of course. You brought up how, it's the game in a nutshell. It is interesting about how it kind of transitions into their offense. And this really goes back to, why do they pull off the corner? What are they trying to do? And whether or not, like, it's, it's a high stakes thing, it's a tight wire act, it's hard to do, yes, of course, but why do they need to do it? Why can't they just rely on OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Scottie Barnes, and Fred to guard their guys and to kind of limit that breaking point at the point of attack? Why do they not only want to stop plays, but they want to stop them in a way that supercharges their offense into transition? And I'm curious what you think about that, because I have ideas about the Cleveland game, and I'll talk about that, but I'm curious what you think about how it went in the Brooklyn game.
No, that's an excellent point. And I think too often, I especially do this, I know other people probably do too, talk about one side of the floor in a vacuum. And you're absolutely right. Why do you want to make this defense this perfect, impossible thing? Because that's the only way you can score efficient offense, right? And so, how did it go against Brooklyn? Well, you kind of need to actually stop the rim in order to run. I think the current research says that missed layups actually do spark transition a lot, but missed threes are not linked to that. Am I right about that?
Well, you think I have that off the cuff? What do you think I have those? I have no
I think
idea.
that's what research is. Yeah, I think missed layups end up more in transition than missed threes. In Toronto, actually, I think so. I'm pretty sure. In Toronto, actually, Brooklyn took less than a quarter of their shots at the rim. I'm still on cleaning glass, by the way. Which, that's insane. That's like a crazy low number. They also made almost 90% of their layups. Like they didn't miss. And so, you're not going to get that easy offense if the other team doesn't miss at the rim. So if you are both giving up lots of corner threes and not protecting the rim, of course you're going to lose. Now, it doesn't help that you miss all your threes, right? There's other factors, but that's crazy. That means, you have 2 goals defensively and you fail in both. So what is the point? That's a great question. I think Khem Birch would help a huge amount, especially in sort of making teams miss at the rim. Toronto just doesn't have a guy who can do that other than Khem Birch. And so, I think your larger point that even goes beyond Brooklyn is that worthwhile to sort of chase perfection when the risk is so high? I don't know. I think Toronto is trying to ask questions that we don't know if they've been asked before in the NBA.
Mm-hmm. And like, that's a great point you make, is why do it? Why do such a thing? And when we look at the Raptors offense, even with Pascal, who is rounding into form, is not fully formed yet. He's coming off of a torn labrum, a long layoff and surgery and, rehab situation. And eventually there will be nights where he just absolutely carries. We saw it last season, even in a season where a lot of people were, bothered by his output. I wasn't one of them, but a lot of people were, and there was a little bit of, the 3-point shooting wasn't there the same way it was the year prior. But in some games, even then, in a down year to some people, he carried the Raptors, and that'll be there, in some games this year. But they are completely dependent on transition opportunities, supplementing / buoying their half court offense, because that's what happened against Cleveland, and it's exactly what happened against Brooklyn. In the first half, the Raptors had everything going because they were playing a more pace and space offense. Fred VanVleet was playing like the wonderful combo guard style. He had 16 in the first half, giving you great looks and second side action as a playmaker and relocating for threes and stuff like that, and being a presence for spacing in other sets and stuff. It was awesome to see, but the transition they were getting was largely a result of the ball being in Kevin Durant's hands, and Kevin Durant had 7 turnovers. The Raptors running out the other way. In the second half against the Nets, James Harden slows everything down, and you could send anybody at them, and the Raptors did, and they ran a pick and roll to get certain matchups, but they also just went straight ISO, and James Harden was getting past the first line of defense, causing rotation for corner threes or to get his own shot. And that was low turnover, slow pace basketball, and it completely crippled the Raptors on the other end. It's that yin and yang. One feeds into the other. But against Cleveland, it's a little bit less, I would say, unforgivable because it's Darius Garland and one of Jared Allen or Evan Mobley who are cooking you. And that's probably the game I'd be upset about, is that Darius Garland is a talented young guard and a guy who I think will be good for a long time. But at the point of attack, and particularly in the screen and roll, don't rely on the tagger, don't rely on the rotation as much. There are some things you have to fight through. And the big man who's playing in that position, playing that zone between the guy who's rolling or popping and the ball handler, has to be sharper. So there's things to like and dislike, but the Nets, I think, put them in too tough a position, whereas I think they did let it slip away versus the Cavs.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I totally agree with you, because the numbers, like Toronto got almost 20 more shots than Cleveland. And Nick Nurse said their analytics basically says that if you get 5 more field goal attempts than the opponent, that's statistically you have a much bigger chance of winning. 20 is crazy. And so I think a lot of the maths, you can have small maths, right? Which is like corner threes versus at rim attempts. But the big maths actually worked out in their favor. They just happened to have very few free throws. They like shot all their shots from the mid range, which was a lot better against Brooklyn. They were a little bit better at attempting threes, getting to the rim. So I think, I mean, the maths are something they're trying to game this year, and we're seeing it. And we're seeing bizarre teams, just like you said, able to defang them, right? You mentioned Brooklyn, Cleveland playing just, okay, well, ISO, not turn it over. What are you going to do? The team that did that first against Toronto was Dallas, right? Dallas in the second half said, we're going to just not pass unless it's like an assist attempt. Just Luka Doncic, Tim Hardaway Jr., do not pass the ball unless you are forced to. It's an open pass, and then that next one is a shot. And Toronto couldn't really do anything against it. And the worry is that's just more what playoff basketball is like. And so Toronto's entire math system, though fascinating, is almost defanged by what basketball becomes in the playoffs.
And like game. That's like when I talk about Cleveland, I don't mean I liked a lot of what they did in Cleveland. I meant the final stretch where Darius Garland. Yeah. Sorry, like they played out. And this is reflected in the reaction podcast. They played a really strong game against Cleveland that, as you say, bizarre styles defanged them down the stretch. Their half-court offense dried up, while Darius Garland, who does not cook every game, he found a way to make lots of great shots and great reads out of the pick and roll. And that, that's where the Raptors were at in the fourth quarter. But a lot of it was really good. And also like pressing them, getting those 20 extra shots. Totally. Big maths versus the small sample size theater that wins from game to game, right? It's like your net rating the season over, your luck adjusted net rating and all that kind of stuff. Like, are you trying to build an analytical model, or are you trying to build a team that finds a way to win? All that kind of stuff. And they're not mutually exclusive or anything like that, but you can see where they kind of diverge when we're talking about these types of games. Pascal Siakam, he comes back into the fold. I'll start off by saying I praised his defense in the reaction podcast. I thought that he solved a lot of problems on that end. Of course, they still end up losing, and he was on a minutes restriction. But what did you think of Pascal's return?
Oh man, it was unbelievable. He totally undoes some of the issues that happen in the offense. Like, he is a not untangler. He had an and one finish in the post. Yeah, he's a Boy Scout. Were you a Boy Scout? You seem like you might have been a Boy Scout.
No. Are there Boy Scouts in Canada?
Hey, I have a friend who was a Boy Scout, and he told me stories about this weird night Boy Scout event where they have contests of knot untying. It sounded like fun. Anyway, he does stuff that no one else does, right? And you've been talking a lot about this in your pods. You've been tweeting about it. I know this is not news to you, but exactly what you predicted is exactly what happened. I mean, he had an and one score in the post against Blake Griffin where they didn't send help, and he had a nice little move, stepped to the side, went out around him, and won. His you taught me this actually. I'm just sort of quoting you for this whole bit, I guess. His ability to release from different places. I mean, he can shoot from so many different places on his body, and that allows him to score pretty easily against single coverage. And no one else in Toronto has that ability. And I was just amazed by it. I mean, obviously, he's not totally himself. He was on a minutes restriction, didn't get tons of shots. The young guys froze him out, which was kind of hilarious that he couldn't get a pass. But I mean, I was just so impressed by how he changed the texture of Toronto's offense.
Yeah, the moral panic that Pascal Siakam went through because of the reports that we talked about on our podcast earlier in the year about how, whose team is this, mine or Kyle's, and kind of hand wringing. And now he comes back and says, whose team is this, mine or Svi's? Because by the way that these possessions are going, it seems to be Svi's team. Anyway.
Yeah.
But I thought it was awesome. Really on that and one against Blake, anchored that pivot foot and moved a lot, still kept it there, kept his balance. Something that OG, I think, really has trouble with. OG, when he's not worried about pivoting, he's just worried about going straight up. Super, super strong. But when he starts pivoting, he moves his weight and his strength outside of his cylinder really fast, and that means he falls away. Pascal Siakam, on some of his finishes, particularly in the post, can keep that weight, that strength in the middle of his body while still moving around and being kind of agile. It's a very unique skill, a micro skill, but it's something that's absolutely in his bag. It's something I enjoy immensely.
Have you ever seen the movie Ip Man?
No.
Okay, so Ip Man is about just trust me, I'm going to bring it back here. Ip Man is about a style of kung fu that I think that Bruce Lee, made popular in Hollywood. It is Wing Chun. And so Ip Man stars Donnie Yen. And the entire idea of this martial art is it's inside the tight spaces. You're seeing where I'm bringing this back.
Yes.
He as soon as he gets close, then that's when the art is able to be unfolded. And Pascal is like a Wing Chun isolation player. He just, in those tight spaces where he thrives. And OG Anunoby, for all of his strength, in those tight spaces is totally defanged, right? The 2-inch punch, I'm just mixing my martial arts movies now. He just doesn't have it, right? He's this wide space, wide stance guy, big strides. But if you just close the space, he loses his balance, loses his strength. I mean, it's interesting that Pascal and OG are so different in those ways.
Mm-hmm. That's also a Dune reference for you and I, the Dune nerds that we are. But like a lot of, for people who have read the books, obviously it talks about how intimate and close quarters the fighting is there, which also plays into your Wing Chun thing. But also, like in the movie, if you saw it, it's close quarters, it's tight. You got to be fast in tight spaces. The long stuff, it's going to get you killed. You can't come through like that. But anyway, yeah, Pascal, offensively, jump shot thoughts? Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked his first make. His other attempt, I like the idea. Like an early clock shot when he's open, I have no problem with it. I think him shooting when he's open is a huge step forward from last season and something that I don't know why he stopped. He lost faith. I also was a little suspicious he took that other 3 because he was tired. But the idea behind it, I've nothing against.
Yeah, honestly, it came on the little pet handoff play between he and Fred. The one actually where Louis Zatzman affected the Raptors because of his conversation with Fred about, hey, end of quarter plays, like Pascal is shooting so-and-so, and Fred remarked, how interesting. And then we saw that play at the end of a quarter. Perhaps it meant something. Perhaps it meant nothing.
Twice. He was shooting 6 for 6. I told Fred in the locker room before the game, he's like, oh, I'll just get him more attempts then. And he went 0 for 2. That very game, Pascal did, and I have never spoken to Fred since. That's not true, but yeah, that was I affected them for the worse.
Yeah, that's actually maybe apropos, right? Is like we all have these delusions of grandeur that if they just let us make the decisions, things would be pretty good. And sometimes, well, actually, probably most times that wouldn't be the case. I guess people who make decisions at the NBA level a lot of times have a track record or some sort of knowledge base, something like that I keep hearing about, seems to be meaningful. But okay, Pascal on ball, some very loose dribbles, but also some
Yeah.
deliveries of his body to the rim, conveying himself, cascading all the way across the court. Thoughts there?
Yeah, you're totally right. But the pros and cons. I think a couple times he sort of tried to create an advantage, couldn't, and just wasted like 5 or 6 seconds of the
Mm-hmm.
clock. That's not going to work with this Raptors team. Like their strengths are quick decision making. That's where Scottie is good. That's where OG is good. And if you slow it down and can't create and just throw a grenade to Gary, that's where you're going to get into trouble. At the same time, like you said, I mean, his swooping cuts, his swooping dribbles, he got to the rim a couple times. And I mean, like no one else can get there right now on this team in isolation. It's crazy how little rim pressure they're putting in games they're creating. I mean, teams just aren't rotating. They're not respecting Toronto around the rim. And Pascal, if you do that to him, is going to kill you. He's going to score 40. If you don't rotate, if you don't like change your defense to stop him from getting to the rim, that's game over. He is that good. And that's something that they need. And so, sure, he was a little loose. He didn't show it 40 times. Obviously, it was just once or twice, but it's once or twice more than anyone else.
It's also worth noting that he shouldn't be one of the high usage, high scoring players in the NBA that's currently going through the terrible effects to their own personal statistics of the significant drop off in 2-point jump shot fouls and 3-point jump shot fouls, because he was never a guy who was drawing a lot of those anyway. There are players who are currently going through withdrawal of some regard, or of some sorts, I should say, in some regard. And that probably won't be something he has to adjust to. And because the dunk / layup attempts are still, registering around the same amount of free throw calls. I just know that Raptors fans have been kind of up in arms about free throws in the last couple of days. So I'm just trying to satiate them by saying maybe more are coming by the way of Pascal. But yeah, the great thing you bring up, right, is that maintaining advantage, something that OG Anunoby hasn't been able to do against like closeouts and stuff this year. That's my biggest gripe. And you won't find me griping about much with OG, but OG is a guy, the ball comes to him and the defense gets to come to a point of rest instead of rotation anymore, because he wants to settle into his ISO package that he worked very hard on in the offseason. He has the size up, he has the dribble package he wants to do, but the defense gets set. There's no maintenance or there's no maintaining advantage there. So you can't keep the defense trying to catch up so that an even bigger advantage comes down the way. Pascal Siakam, for all the time that he's put in as a number one guy, a pseudo number one guy, and a role player, that's something he's actually still very, very good at, is maintaining advantage, keeping the ball moving, whether it's with him or without him. And so I'm excited to see that as a guy who can punish teams off the bounce, because Fred does it as a three-point shooter. Gary Trent Jr. does it as a three-point shooter or a one dribble into an 18-foot guy. OG currently has done it as a catch-and-shoot guy. And basically nobody else on the Raptors has been able to maintain advantage and then bring that into rim pressure. That's the whole deal with Pascal, right? And especially with Fred growing as a playmaker, OG registering a little bit more attention from defenses, and just overall more, I guess, attempts out in the open floor, and plus Scottie. That looks like something that could be kind of a big deal.
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing. I'm not sure if we've ever spoken about this before. This may be sort of basic for you, but let's see. So I think advantage can be sort of parceled out into you create it, you extend it, or you finish it. And OG has always been a good advantage finisher with that catch and shoot, right? If you create space, he's just going to hit an open jumper.
And as a cutter, like just a super high frequency finisher at the rim.
Absolutely. Especially, when it's two guys on one side, the ball gets swung, one defender, and then he cuts, and then it's just an uncontested dunk, right? That's extending and then finishing. I think what Siakam does well is advantage extension that OG doesn't in terms of those intermediary passes. And what he sort of lost last year was advantage finishing. He was a lot worse at finishing at the rim. His jumper fell off a cliff. That's advantage finishing. And it's rare you have a guy who can do all three. Right now, OG Anunoby is an advantage creator, especially in the post, and an advantage finisher as a cutter and shooter. He's not really extending it with those snap decisions. Siakam is an advantage creator, extender, and if his jumper comes around, finisher. That's crazy that you can have a guy who does that. Barnes is an advantage extender right now, almost exclusively, but he's so good at it that he's just incredibly helpful. And so I think what we're really harping on as the negatives for OG and Siakam right now, I mean, obviously we're talking about the positives as well, but the negatives we're really specifically referring to OG taking time to make decisions, and Pascal as a finisher. Those are the elements that the other is so good at, right? It's interesting if you could just merge them, and this is what we're talking about: tight spaces, wide spaces. They are really good at what the other is not. And you see it in like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, guys developing alongside each other years and years. It's almost logical that they'll become good at things the other isn't because they're on the floor so much together.
Conversations with you are so wildly rewarding. What a point to make. Oh, you brought that together beautifully, especially with the Tatum and Brown reference. Well done. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that's the thing too, is like, is Pascal on the precipice of, bringing all three into the fold? Because once again, in this game, he had, the bunnies that didn't go in. That always went in. That always went in during his ascent, right? Like, and also something Scottie Barnes captured a little bit early on in the season, and still with the like mid-range jumpers and just how Scottie Barnes went from somebody nobody regarded as a scorer and had significant questions about it to the highest scoring rookie, and without question is like these really janky bank shots, these high formed hooks that kind of get every inch of the rim and roll in lightly. It's like Pascal Siakam is getting every inch of the rim and rolling out for a year now, and he's exhibited touch on so many attempts over such a long stretch that you wonder, it will quit at some point. The missed bunnies will just start dropping in at a rate that everybody is comfortable with once again. It's something I don't want to worry about, but the longer it goes on, I wonder. Do you have any qualms or anything on that?
No, I mean, you played basketball at a high level. I don't know how often you talk about that on the pod, but you did. Not obviously.
Nobody needs to know. Not a high enough level that it matters.
But a high enough level that you would know this. I mean, I didn't play at nearly so high level, and I know this. The feel of a layup when it hits every part of the rim and rolls out feels like a make coming off the fingers, right? Like it feels like that layup went in, even when it doesn't. And that's not true on misses that don't do that. And so you hope the guy keeps doing the same thing when you miss like that for a year, like you said. Just like, please, God, don't let that change his mindset. I mean, do you agree? Is that how you see it? I mean, you played much higher than I did.
Well, that's an interesting observation, because I feel that as well because I'm not a super high level shooter, right? Like they were talking about how Steph Curry, he even some of his makes, they qualify them as misses when he's doing practice. They need a certain percentile of make, like on arc, angle that it enters the basket, like it can't touch rim. If it touches rim, that's not a make. That's like absurd for one. But people who don't play a super high level, which is, both you and I, if you get every piece of the rim and it spits it out, you're like, this basket hates me. Not that your ball was always destined to miss, but that like through some terrible force of nature. The rim has chewed on your ball and spit it out with like a terrible distaste and cursed you as somebody who the ball, it will not leave your fingers and enter the hole, like that type of thing. But you consider it like it was in the vicinity of the basket. Damn you. How dare you deny entry of my ball? Like that type of thing. I don't know. I think that's probably a very personal thing to Pascal. So I couldn't say whether or not, because I do fit in the same as you. Although there are shots that feel a lot better and they can miss, and there are shots that feel bad that can go in. And maybe that speaks to my level of a shooter, and also the nerve damage in my shooting hand that I ended up getting. But confusing things happen on the court when you're not as high a level athlete as like an NBA player. So I don't know.
I played. I know that this is like the most detoured thing, but we're always going to take detours. I played pool at a fairly high level, and it was the same thing where I made shots. Like, I know I made the shot. I can play pool blind, like close my eyes and I can make shots, and I know it went in and it just got spit out. And I played not at a professional level, but I would win some games if I played some pros. Not a lot, but some. And I think there is something to chance. There's an element of chance in any game like that. The wider the court, the less, like tennis, you're not going to have chance, because the chance of missing by an inch or not is extremely minimal. Whereas basketball, pool, when the thing that you're putting inside of another thing are practically the same size, they're just, chance has to play a part.
Well, yeah, that is interesting too, is that you can shoot it more in the center of the basket and miss than if you didn't shoot it as much in the center of the basket. Like, there are some, and the arc of it, there are some funny dimensions, I suppose. But on a tennis court, it's just going to be in or not, I suppose, is like a very interesting thing. Yeah, excellent point. Should we leave the Pascal stuff at the door? We've given him lots of time, which he deserves, of course. But are you ready to walk away from the? Okay, let's do front court, because you and I talked about it. Khem Birch, Precious Achiuwa. I think we had agreed that Khem was the best center on the roster. Although in my prep, like when I wrote about every player on the roster, including the training camp roster to start the year, I said that Precious Achiuwa might be the high ceiling play. And I think that's probably the rationale for why he was starting, something to that degree. But I think there's been no doubt that Khem Birch has been the most effective center on the roster thus far. Relative to that conversation, or not relative to it, what have you thought about Khem Birch as the de facto center so far?
I've been so excited for this very conversation because of that one we had before. I think Khem Birch was a place that we disagreed on. I was a little bit higher on Khem Birch than you were coming into the season. Not to say you were low on him, but just, as a matter of degree. And I think I have been correct on him. I mean, I checked in a week or two ago and I was like, hey, Khem Birch playing pretty well. How do you feel? Trying to rub it in. You're like, yeah, it's basically what I expected. I wanted to extend that. I wanted to save it for a podcast, and we're on a podcast. So I'm curious, do you feel like you were a little low on Birch coming into the season, or do you think that you hit it on the head?
See, now this is the super interesting part, right? He is about what I expected. Does that make sense to you? So like, and you know me as somebody who we've been on the podcast together, and I've eaten crow happily. So I don't think I'm afraid. Yeah. So I don't think I'm afraid of that. But do you think I'm missing something? Like, do you remember specifically maybe something? Well, you don't have to quote me, but like, what if you had to guess, what was I low on that he came in higher? Like, where did I miss, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think you said he was a good defender, not a great one. And I actually think he has been a great defender. I think specifically as a rim protector, I have more stats in front of me. I prepped for a lot of this.
Hell yeah.
He has held opponents to just over 5% lower than their expected field goal percentage would be from within 6 feet. The best defenders, Rudy Gobert, hold players to about, I think, 8 or 9% lower at the rim. 5% is excellent. That's a very, very good for a center. Like, not for anybody, for a center. That's very good.
He was like 2 or 3% last year, if I remember correctly. Do you have that?
Yep. Last year, I think 1.7, negative 1.7. He held them below 1.9. This year, 5.4. That's a big gap. Yeah, really nice. It's not the number of contests. And I mean, number of contests are almost as important as that differential, because if you're contesting 15 shots at the rim a game, I mean, it's not a huge deal if you're holding them to 5% below or 2% below, because you're there so much. That's just huge. And he's only contesting 5 a game. Like, that's a little bit low, especially for a center, even though he's asked to switch and rotate and whatever. I think his rebounding has been exquisite. The team's rebounding has been amazing with him on. I think his defense has been so good that it just doesn't work without him. I think as long as you have OG, Pascal, Scottie Barnes, amazing though they are, their incredible skills won't be unlocked without Birch beside them. And that's, I think, the level of height that I had on him, the level of respect I had for his defense before the year. And I think that you needed to be proved. You didn't disbelieve it. You just didn't think you'd seen enough evidence to be sure. I think we still haven't seen enough evidence to be sure, but it still points in the direction of him being a great defender, no?
Okay, yeah, those are great points. Well done for the numbers and recalling what I thought. The biggest thing that I probably should just eat is Khem Birch last year, I think, didn't have a big impact on the rebounding, even though his prior numbers over the course of his career suggested that he would. And so I was lower on that heading into this year than maybe I should have been. Closing out defensive possessions is a big deal. Extending offensive ones, not by, advantage creation, but just resetting that shot clock to 14 with, the ball in hand for your team is big as well. So the rebounding, I definitely would say so far into the season, I was lower on him than I should have been. The contests at the rim, still super low in volume, but that goes right back into what we opened up this podcast talking about, which is they are just pressuring the ball before the paint touch is made, before the attempt at the rim is made. That's like they want to suppress those shots, and they are. But that also means that you don't get to see as high volume of Khem Birch defending the rim, altering shots, all that kind of stuff. As you said, volume is just as important. Volume is important for everything. It's why I wrote about OG and said, the pull-up is nice in the regular season, or in the preseason, but there's literally nothing suggesting that this is a running trend. This could just be like a flash in the pan. So he still needs to be doing all the things that he was good at prior, not just hitting ISO jumpers and stuff like that. But I've really enjoyed how he moves in the defense so far. It is better than I expected. So I would, what is it? We're like, I guess 11 games into the season so far. I'd shake your hand and say you're well on your way to being correct or having a better idea of Birch's game heading into the season than I did. I would say that for sure.
It's funny because our disagreement was actually extremely slight, right? If we were ranking him out of 100, we probably only differed by like 2 or 3, maybe 5 points. Like it was a very small disagreement. And so it's hard to say if anyone was right or wrong.
No, I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll take
looking at the on-offs though, they are a worse defensive rebounding team with him on the floor, which I would not have expected. He is 100th percentile offensive rebounder on offs. 15% higher. They rebound more offensively with him on the floor, but a little bit worse defensive rebounding. That's crazy. I don't quite understand that, but that's what it says.
We're still operating in the early parts of the season. Like, 25 games is a pretty good place to start checking this stuff. Of course, we work. Like, this is our job, so we'll be
Yeah.
checking in on this stuff. We're looking for new, a new angle to write about what is happening so far. Of course, that's important. But for anybody who's looking for yourself, if you want to get like a real idea of where a player's headed for the season, 25 games in seems like a really healthy place to do it. Some people will tell you 12 or 13 for team-wide stuff, but for player stuff, there's a little bit more, I guess, more swings in there during a season. Trends come and go a little bit more in player style than in the play style of a team. But 25 games, maybe game 25, we come back and we check in on this. Seems like a good place. Do you want
And it depends on the thing too, right? Like rebounds happen a lot. Turnovers happen way less. So on-offs for turnovers, a little bit less, indicative. Anyway, please continue.
Mm-hmm. Are you happy with the attention that Khem has received? Do you want to move on to Precious?
But the one thing I would add actually about Khem, his offense has been nice, right? He set good screens. He's finished those floaters that he's always been good at. He's hit the glass. I think, we talk a lot about his defense. His offense, clearly he's not a star. He's not, building any huge advantages, but he's been quite solid and totally playable on that end. I think that's worthy of at least mentioning.
Yeah. I think I still want the short roll passing to like come along in a significant way. And the finishing at the rim has left me wanting, although the floaters, as you say, have been honestly dynamite. So that's cool to see. But just going up straight and being able to finish is such a huge thing for a big man. And he currently does not possess that. Does he have the athleticism to like tower over guys and get there? No, but could he stand to get a little bit better at like clearing space, going up, or recognizing when the pass out is there? Those are some things that I hope develop over the rest of the year, along with the short roll. Because as you say, the screen setting has been, I would think, quite good. So that means that he's one of the better options to clear space for anybody who's on ball, and B, he's making a lot of good contact, and that means he can clear space so that he can kind of roll into the lane, and then the defense rotates from there. You want to see a guy making good decisions. Yeah. Do you have any qualms with anything I said there?
No, totally agreed, right? He's just not going to give you that traditional center play benefit on offense, which is like kind of why you play a center, because they help so much on offense by being gigantic and just finishing at the rim. It's hard when your guy doesn't do that. It's hard to be a benefit without doing that as a center. And so that's why I didn't want to go overboard and say he's been great. He's been playable, though, I think. I don't think we disagree there.
Yeah. And like the 3-point shooting, there was never any guarantee that was something that was going to stick around. And it hasn't been a huge
indication
focus
at all.
Yeah.
Not just guarantee, like, why would you even think it might?
Well, there's some people really that basically a player comes to Toronto, a large part of the fan base says they'll make him into a 3-point shooter. And then they see like a game with 1 or 2 threes and they say it's here. And it's something we can now count on, which, maybe within the Raptors is a little bit overstated, but they've done it with a couple players. So I'm not super mad at it, but nothing on that front with Khem so far. Precious.
Well, that's actually worth mentioning. The shooting program that is this famed thing, that's a 4-year program. And it involves a lot of work in practice, changing, which fingers you release on, changing that arc you mentioned. That's not something that Khem could possibly have at this point after coming to Toronto so late last year. So, maybe he is in the program. I doubt he actually even is. That's something that they put guys like Norm, Pascal, Scottie, Delano. Like, I don't see that being something they prioritize for Khem. And even if they had, wouldn't be where he would be right now.
Yeah, excellent point. And that's something that, was also something with Pascal was like when he was hitting so early on, Nick Nurse was like, yeah, he's got about 18 months to go still. And everybody's like, wait, but he's good now. And he's like, oh yeah, we see lots of stuff we don't like all the time. And then, and then he obviously had that season with bad shooting, but it's all coming around, fingers crossed. Okay, Precious Achiuwa, the other, let's say, I don't know, center, right? Like, I think you can find him labeled as a small forward / power forward, with like fantasy and all that kind of stuff. And he's not even labeled as a center, but he's a starting center in the NBA for a 10-game stretch, I guess. So what have you thought of him so far?
What have I thought of him so far? I think Precious Achiuwa has an unbelievable arsenal of skills, none of which are developed, but things he's willing to try. And they are, you said this, I think you messaged this to me during a game. He's going to be in the league for 10 years, not as a guy who's in the league for 10 years like Danny Green or PJ Tucker, who's just so solid that they're just always in the league. I think he's going to be in the league for 10 years because every team is going to be like, maybe we will unlock the star, Precious Achiuwa, because he has those tools that if he were to get good at all the things he tries all at once, he would be a star. He has not been good at all those things thus far in Toronto. Doesn't mean he won't become good at them. I mean, I see the appeal. He is a clever passer. He can handle in the open court. He is a smooth finisher in space when he gets like a nice wide jump and sees where contests are coming from. His shot looks good. His shot looks very good. He can force turnover. There's stuff going on, but his inability to see rotations, to execute rotations, he can really like not. Sometimes he'll try to get to the rim before the guy he's guarding has even decided to get there and just give up an open jumper. He will hijack offensive plays. His decision-making has been poor enough to make him one of the least valuable players on the team this year. So it's hard. I get why Toronto's starting him, right? If you put it together, he is one of the core pieces. So I get putting him in the starting lineup. I get giving him shots. I get playing him alongside the stars because hopefully you can develop and still win games. That's what they were doing until 2 games ago. It's a very fine line to walk. And it's been a rough season for him, but that doesn't mean he isn't still an exciting player. Was that too critical?
No. You brought up you brought up advantage creation, advantage extension, and advantage finishing. And typically, like this is let's say the Daniel Gafford of it all, the Mitchell Robinson of it all, is these springy bigs. Typically what they can hang their hat on is like they'll finish at the bucket. And this is also something like a dear friend of the show, the only guest writer on Minute Basketball so far, Joe Wolfond, via tweet remarked upon, like Precious Achiuwa as a big man, his true shooting percentage is 39%. And he said that's legitimately hard to do given the shot diet. And it is. Precious Achiuwa has been remarkably impotent around the basket as far as like finishing stuff. It's something you remarked upon in your piece about what the hell is happening with, Precious and Fred in the pick and roll. What's happening here? And sometimes just straight up Precious is botching opportunity. And as you say, can completely hijack offensive possessions in a almost mind-numbing way. And on top of that, when his guy plays off of him, seems to have no idea how to interpret the space afforded to him. And sometimes will just walk towards a ball handler on his own team and just crowd space. Like perplexing stuff, but also like extremely fun and funny that this guy is out on the floor, just vibes, man, just moving around, trying to catch up with his buddies. Like, it's a confusing experience with Precious. But as you say, the complete package is tantalizing. And the Raptors are a team that they want tantalizing. Like, why the hell wouldn't you go for it, right? They drafted Banton for a reason. Okay, you're a funky player. Let's see if we can access the funk more and more, that type of thing, right?
An advantage creator from the center spot. What a wild and crazy choice. Right? That's as you absolutely and astutely pointed out, or Joe, who we love, right? He's not finishing plays. And you need that from a center. And the thing is, and this is why Toronto's small ball lineup is difficult to see as, the death lineup, because who is that finisher as a center? Maybe Scottie Barnes. Like maybe Scottie Barnes is that center who just he finishes everything around the rim. He sets screens. He passes on the short roll. It's possible, but Precious is not that so far, which has been disappointing.
Given Scottie, I believe he has like an almost unprecedented level of putbacks relative to his shot diet. Like, I think it would be very difficult to find a player with a similar shot diet and a similar unassisted percentage as Scottie, like this many games into a career, that's scoring as much as he has. So Scottie represents somebody who I think offensively can operate as the nominal 5 in a death lineup, I guess, right? And there'll never be another death lineup because Steph Curry is just whatever the hell he was, right? And continues to be. But Scottie, as you say, like the short roll passer, the guy who sneaks in from the dunker spot, can either take it off the bounce, one dribble and go up, or can catch the lob and will be, a dribble handoff guy, all that kind of stuff. A shaker, a mover, a wheel greaser offensively. That stuff all exists for Scottie, but it gets a little bit more complicated about like the defensive end. And then the defense, we talked about how, like, if you play those 5, the starting 5 that they played in the Nets game, that defense gets so funky so quick because they'll just switch across everything in a blink. I remarked upon it on Twitter and in the reaction podcast is like, there's a Chicago action, which is a 3-person action offensively, and the Raptors switched every single one. So everybody swapped who they were guarding, and the Nets were just kind of like, oh, what the hell? This doesn't happen option. Like after the guy get the handoff, maybe then you see a guy switch it, but the Raptors were switching on the bottom guy as well, and then attacking the handoff from the bottom, and then rotating over to cover the back end so the guy didn't make like a basket cut. Just a lot of stuff happening offensive or defensively. So to move us away from Precious, do you see like a ceiling or anything of that sort with the Raptors 5 since we're there?
I think their ceiling is given by discrete skills. It, you ask me the big question, I give the small answer. But if OG Anunoby can do what he has actually like not infrequently done to Jokic and done to Joel Embiid, which is okay, if you get it within 3 feet, you're going to score. That's fine. I can make up for that in many ways. I'll jump passing lanes. I'll strip you with the ball if you're dribbling on the perimeter. I will bang with you if you try to get post position. The dude has like the tree trunk legs, and he will fight you for every inch you try to take in the paint. And so OG Anunoby, might not be able to contest those guys at the rim, which is traditionally what you want from a center defender, but he sort of steals enough in other ways that you can live with it. And so that's hard, man. That's like to fight Joel Embiid for every inch of space he takes off the ball. Like that is hard. You're not going to do that on like a Tuesday day game. Does such a thing exist when you went out the night before? Like nobody's doing that in the NBA in the regular season, every game. That's insane. But so how high is their ceiling? Like how willing is OG Anunoby to just like kill himself every play on defense? And then when he's alongside Gary Trent, Pascal, Scottie, like to sort of not use any of that ISO package he painstakingly put together his whole career. Similarly, how engaged is Gary Trent, not just getting steals, but like rotating properly, Xing out properly, like helping at the rim when he's the help. Like there are questions. And so I think US ceiling, I think the ceiling is unlimited. They could be an elite defensive unit. Whether they can do that for more than 4 minutes at a time, difficult to say. Whether they can do that for 30 games, that's when I start saying, well, maybe not, right? So I don't think that's a long-term starting unit, probably a closing unit on certain nights and only like 4 minutes, 3 minutes. You're not playing 8 minutes of the fourth quarter like that.
Honestly, great point. And they seem like a team, maybe a year or two down the road, if they're, you start getting maybe into the top half of the Eastern Conference. If Khem has stagnated, then maybe you start looking for one of those super, undervalued centers who plays 26 minutes a night, right? And if they're real, like the Zubats, the Valanciunas, the Rashawn Holmes, something like that, those guys, you let them take that insane heavy load of going center to center for so many games a season. And then if you can move away from it, you do. If they're on a roll and they're adding that punch offensively and defensively, you run with it. But they take a lot of the brute force out of those games. But yeah, the point you make is a very good one, because we have yet to see a team lean into that and not crumble from just the sheer toll of dealing with even a guy like Montrezl Harrell, who isn't one of the titans of the NBA. Dealing with him, centers like dealing with Montrezl Harrell. Power forwards do not. Like, he is just the Tasmanian devil. And Joel Embiid, Jokic, whoever, right? Like these titans of the bigs are, you just can't contend with that. Not night in and night out.
And Khem Birch, when he had a shot against Harrell, was clearly still extremely hindered from his time in the his time off the roster, injured.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Khem Birch would be totally fine going up against Harrell now. That game was just a fluke that he did so poorly. But yeah, I mean, if you start Scottie or OG or Pascal against Harrell, you're in for a tough night. And that's crazy. Like, that's not how you want to play basketball night in and night out. So I agree with you. I completely agree with you that is a team with a high ceiling, or a lineup with a high ceiling, but a very limited ceiling, a thin ceiling, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, at the very least, it seems like they've discovered a ceiling, right? Like that's the thing is, they talk about it all the time in the most meaningful games. What's the best lineup, and how dominant can your best lineup be? I think that's like really cool. And the Raptors, they did win a championship playing quite a few different lineups and being adaptable. Like Serge and Mark played game 7 together against the 76ers and played a lot of that series together, and they won those minutes. And they also played smaller against they split them up against the Warriors, for example. So, versatility is very good if you have the pieces on the roster. But if you don't have all the pieces, having at least one dominant lineup, which it looks like the fruit, the seeds of that are there with this starting 5, that's a good find at the very least, but not a sustainable one, maybe would be the way to put it. Yeah.
There's a reason why the Warriors started Andrew Bogut and Festus Ezeli. Like, they know what they're doing. That's not random that these guys who are not their 5th best player are starting games. And the Raptors, I mean, that team, that lineup, I think really interesting. What's their ceiling on offense? Because Scottie Barnes and Pascal Siakam are really interesting to fit together. And that's one thing that I really enjoyed watching this Nets game. Barnes and Siakam need extremely subtle ways to work together, because Siakam's not a great roller yet. Barnes isn't a great initiator in the pick and roll. OG Anunoby may be your best off-ball shooter other than Fred, also maybe your best screener. And so it's interesting to see what that lineup might become, because guys do need to improve in certain areas.
Well, it was interesting you bring up, you and I have lamented Pascal, how he operates as a roller in the pick and roll. And even late in the game, he went to the free throw line because he went out without using like a pound dribble that he could use for a jump stop, and then dunked in the lane, because he doesn't have the pacing as a roller, whether it's showing to be available for the pass or his steps he takes after receiving it. It's just like, man, if OG had caught that pass, he would have used like a gather step and like collected the dribble and then dunked it. And it's just like that comfortability in that. But yeah, offensively, and this is where your point about they grew differently, because of course they did, Pascal and OG. And of course Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum grew differently. Like that, you wonder if Scottie and Pascal are sharing so many minutes, does it start to impart upon Scottie's development in a major way? Are those, are snug pick and rolls with Scottie shooting mid-range jump shots suddenly like a huge part of Scottie's career? Whereas if you were drafted by the Magic instead, that's just something he never does, right? Like, that's fascinating to me.
Totally. I'm I just finished a book. This is off the rails. I just finished a book by Jeff Vandermeer. Have you ever heard of Jeff Vandermeer?
I have not.
He wrote the Southern Reach trilogy, which they just turned the first one into a movie, Annihilation. But I'm reading his newer books, and I just finished Born, and it's this sort of sci-fi dystopian thing. But and I think they're making this into a movie now, so no spoilers. There's this whole concept of this monster that is sort of adopted as a child, so to speak, by a fairly good person in this apocalyptic world. Grows up to wonder, am I a monster? Am I a person? It's nature nurture, right? But in this extremely high stakes world, and what is your nature? And what is changeable based on the species that you end up with? Like, what's fate? And so this is in my mind because I read like 200 pages of that book yesterday. But that's really what we're talking about. What's fate for Scottie Barnes? Who is he fated to be? And what can Toronto build into the genetics? It's fascinating. Sometimes I love basketball on the most discrete level. But sometimes I just wish I could peek 4 years ahead, just whisper behind the curtain and see, oh my God, that is what that guy is 4 years from now. It's so interesting to speculate. And the answers would just be fascinating to have. Alas, time does not work like that.
It's a really long answer of saying that you read 200 pages in a day, Lewis.
Yes, no, humble brag.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Okay, final. By the way, fantastic answer. Neither you or I have it, obviously. Like your answer was posing the question, like, hey, yeah, you're right. What the hell is going to happen? And the only thing I can respond is agreed. Like, what the hell is going to happen? Can't wait to see it. Yuta Watanabe, a favorite of yours and a favorite of mine. I love his game. I know you do too. Talk about the discreet, celebrate a guy who's maybe he owns the best closeout in the NBA, perhaps. Like he does so many fun little discreet things on the court that I just can't wait to see him, particularly in this lineup, right? And well, not in this lineup, but in this context on this team. Between Banton, Svi, lesser like Malachi Flynn, Isak Bonga, if he gets into a game, is there anybody you think is going to be kind of, I guess, disaffected by his return into the lineup? Or do you think that Yuta there's nothing guaranteed for him once he arrives, healthy?
I wish there was something guaranteed for him because he deserves it in terms of how much he's developed. But what the team is asking for him in terms of structurally is almost unfair, because look at it this way. Last year, they said, look, you're a great defender. What we need right now is you to become a great shooter. And he wasn't, and he became one. And now he's a great shooter. Now he's going to come back from this injury, said, okay, look, you're a great shooter. That's awesome. But now we need you to be a second side attacker, a ball handler. Like, he was a 3-4 last year. They need him to be a 2 if he's going to get minutes, right? He needs to take minutes from Svi, like you said. And Svi, for all of his limitations on the defensive end, rises up as a shooter, jets around screens. I mean, he attacks off the bounce, which you wrote about after preseason. And if Yuta, if he can't offer at least a simulation of that, I'm not sure if he is guaranteed anything. It's unfair, right? He did what they asked. He became a shooter. And I still don't think it's guaranteed that he gets minutes.
That's a great point. How odd is it that he played that position last year? Like the position that people have been shoehorned into on the Raptors for years and years, like that 3-4 guy who defends and like they teach to shoot threes. Like a Malcolm Miller.
You mean what they thought Norman Powell was?
Yeah, right. Like
Terrence Ross.
Yeah. Alfonso McKinney, Malcolm Miller. Yeah, like every guy that they brought through like that. That's like even Jordan Lloyd to some degree. They're like, come on, buddy, this is what we want from you. Now they're saying you need to steal minutes and roll from Svi and Malachi Flynn. And Yuta Watanabe, to his credit, took on some of those responsibilities with Team Japan in the Olympics and showed out quite well. Now, and this is something he admitted, this is something he's looking to, well, not admitted, commented on. Yes, very shameful of you, Yuta. But something he commented on is that this is something he's looking to apply at the NBA level, that he knows his skills are higher than what he was applying. So he's going to see what he can reach. But that is a great point, is like the context of this roster is not kind to him. If you put him on last year's team after the steps he took as an Olympic athlete, maybe he does even better. Maybe he steals even more of Paul Watson's minutes or something like that. But yeah, at the very least, the same way that Svi, when he gets like attacks a closeout, he can like jump stop in the lane and find a guy and make a pocket pass, or he can reject a screen and find a pass down the line. Like that stuff is all super important when he does it on the Raptors. And if Yuta showed any of that, I think the minutes would be his. But God, it's tough. It's tough for him.
Yeah. And it's frankly, I think Yuta is a better player, right? I think the gap on the defensive end is just unbelievable how much better Yuta is. But just what the team needs, right now, it's more of what Svi gives. And I will get frustrated watching him, not preempt what's going on defense. And so that's, kind of waste what his unbelievable defensive partners are doing on that string. That will be frustrating. But what would be more frustrating is 15 minutes a game where the Raptors don't have anyone who can maintain or finish an advantage, to get back to that. And Svi does do those things. He maintains, he finishes. And so, Yuta Watanabe right now on offense is purely an advantage finisher, as a shooter, as a cutter. He needs to extend, and that's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like you look at teams in the playoffs that they play that heliocentric style, and like Luka, Trey, LeBron, who was more valuable than the guy who took the 3-point shot that was available to them and put the ball on the floor and actually got to the rim, and you felt the pressure of the offense completely release. Because defenses, it feels like after so many years of adjusting to what the NBA was doing, especially with how corner heavy, these offenses have become, they started telling those standstill 3-point shooters, like, you got to put the ball on the ground. Like DeMare Carroll, who was so valuable for those 60-win Hawks, just does not do well in today's NBA. It couldn't possibly. Because I think the schemes and defenses have caught up to it, quite frankly. And so guys who could just be 3-and-D now have to extend past themselves and transcend that a little bit.
Well, that's how fast the league has changed. I mean, how many guys were brought into Portland, say, to do exactly that around Dame? Right. They're like, okay, we need a shooter. We get a shooter in the offseason. And then by the time the league starts, it's like, oh, actually, we need a lot more from you. And they washed out. How many guys washed out of Portland, out of Dallas, right? Out of Houston when Harden was there. Just the number of players who have been asked to do one thing when they're brought to a team and then needed to do another when the games start is uncountable. And I worry that that'll happen to Yuta.
That's the whole thing. And this is really our shit, Lewis. But like, Eric Gordon can shoot 22% from 3, but you need him on the floor. And Daniel House can shoot 40%, but like, you're going to play Eric down the stretch because he can he'll give you that little bit of oomph,
That's exactly it, man. Eric Gordon would immediately play 20 minutes a game on this Raptors team. And have so many fans crying foul, but ultimately it would be necessary.
Oh, he would be so good on this Raptors. Eric Gordon would be almost a panache. Like he'd be everything for this Raptors team. A salve.
Yeah, he'd be huge.
Yeah.
He'd probably be in the closing lineup.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. Yeah. Eric Gordon hours, for real. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about as far as the Raptors?
There was one thing I was hoping. It doesn't need to be long. Fred VanVleet, man, like, I know probably this is something everyone's talking about every day after every game, but like, what a guy to have done. We talk about how the game changed, right? We just mentioned this in the last segment. The game changes around people, and Fred has always into this very day, kept up with all of it. It's wild, right? He was a Daryl Morey player where all he took were layups and threes. And now he's adding a mid-range game. Now he's adding pick and roll creation. Like, it's just crazy how much he has added to his game. And without him, frankly, like, there's a reason why he leads the NBA in minutes, because Toronto is nothing without him right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't feel as much of a need to comment on Fred. 'Cause I don't know if you listened to last week's episode, but he got a lot. I was like, let me give him his flowers because, but yeah, that's a great point. It's like, not only is this a guy who is doing the classic carry job that we saw last year, but he deserves a ton of credit, not just because of, he was a guy who improved his skills, but he did it at the behest of himself and the league. The pressure was coming from more than one area, and he's continued to make his game more varied while also not losing a single thing. And that's like the interesting part, right? Is like Fred, some people can, you can hand wring about what he's trying to do offensively. Sometimes I do get that. But OG Anunoby, for example, is like, when you watch in that Boston Celtics series, OG pops and he sees that he can attack a closeout. He gets downhill and then he finds a cutter on the move for a 3-point shot. That's that advantage extension. Now with this, he's implemented these new skills. He pops and the guy attacks him. He wants to, settle into an ISO situation. It's never, ever leaving the good parts of your game. And I think Fred has done such a good job. And it was also evident in that first half against the Nets, is like, he'll return to all the things that he made his bread and butter on immediately if afforded to it. And he'll also give you everything new. And that's just extremely intelligent application of all the things he's got going on. He's been immense. I can't say enough good things about Fred so far this year.
That's all. I mean, I know you've talked about it. That's all. I just felt, as long as we're going to be talking about this advantage conversation and the changing of the league, I just thought it was apropos to mention how worthy he's been.
Mm-hmm. Hard to do. Really, really hard to. He's been up against it at every single turn, and he's won each time. It's pretty astounding.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. That's all. So no, now I'm happy.
Okay. Had to get a little Fred in there because he's a good player.
Always.
And we know how you feel about Fred. Well, how most people feel about Fred, extremely conscientious, wonderful man who also happens to be really good at basketball. Good for him.
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Okay, Lewis, before we get out of here, is there anything you'd like to plug?
I will have an extremely exciting OG Anunoby piece coming out soon. That's pretty much all. Stay tuned for some words on OG. I cannot wait.
I can't wait either. With bated breath, I would say. Just to kick off where we started this conversation, that wasn't recorded, but with bated breath, I wait for that OG Anunoby piece the same way you waited for my Zoom invite link.
Yes.
All right, Lewis, thank you so much for coming on, brother.
I look forward to these. They're like manna in the desert for the wandering Israelites. These pods with you are always so much fun, dude.
Manna in the desert for the wandering Israelites. Who else could I bring on that would have these pulls? Okay. I remember, I impressed you by almost perfectly, I guess, emulating the soundtrack to Inception off the top of my head and giving you, this really esoteric Bible verse. And you return it all 1,000 times over with far more esoteric things that just they tickle that part of my brain that I just enjoyed so much. So these conversations, the same way for you, just fantastic for me. Thank you, Lewis.
Yes, sir.
All right, listener, I hope you enjoyed it. And I bet you did. I'm feeling confident that you did. Thanks for tuning in, whether you got into it in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day and goodbye.